When you hear the term studio sound, it used to mean accuracy and clarity, but now it's just a marketing free-for-all, being one of the most abused audio terms in the music industry since it doesn't even mean what you think it means anymore. So let's break down this term, shall we? I'm Elon Osborne, and this is Ecoustically Speaking. Let's get one thing straight. Studio sound is the biggest load of marketing fertilizer this side of audiophile grade copper, am I right? After years of hearing, you're not supposed to enjoy those, they're for studio use. We at ecoustics.com are officially done pretending that phrase means anything in 2025. Every brand seems to have its own take on what studio supposedly sounds like. And spoiler alert, they're all different. The light bulb moment came courtesy of the new Beyerdynamic DT990 Pro X headphones. It has a name very similar to the DT990, it looks like the DT900 Pro X, yet somehow manages to sound like neither. Yet all three proudly wear the studio headphone badge. If studio sound actually meant a consistent sonic signature, how the hell did we end up with three wildly different signatures from the same brand? Is it possible we've been duped this whole time, that studio headphones are just regular cans dressed up with thicker pads and tougher joints, built to survive the abuse of coffee-fueled engineers and gravity-prone mic stands? The term studio sound wasn't born from headphones or speakers at all. It came from what engineers heard in the control room versus what the rest of us heard at home. Back then, it actually meant something. The secret wasn't magic drivers or gold-plated cables, it was the room itself. Acoustic treatment killed the reflections, echoes, and stray vibrations, giving engineers a brutally clean, controlled sound that was miles away from what you'd get in a living room with drywalls, windows, and a couch acting like a bass trap. That equipment often defined each studio's unique sonic fingerprint. Abbey Road wasn't just the Beatles' hangout because it had nice wallpaper, it was loaded with gear that shaped their sound. Chief among them was the Hammond RT3 organ, purchased by the studio back in the 1950s, long before the Fab Four even showed up. That same organ ended up on a ton of Beatles tracks and became part of their DNA. Abbey Road was already hallowed ground by then, the birthplace of British rock and roll, with Cliff Richard and the Drifters, who'd later become the Shadows. They cut their very own Move It in 1958 inside the now legendary Studio 2. As John Lennon once put it, "Before Cliff and Move It, there was really nothing worth listening to in Britain." My apologies to any Brits who actually heard me do that just now. So the Beatles didn't just stumble onto Abbey Road, they followed Cliff's trail. They even considered inviting Billy Preston, the man behind the unmistakable organ tone, to so many Beatles sessions, to join as the unofficial fifth Beatle. And it's no coincidence that Pink Floyd later gravitated to Abbey Road as well. That same Hammond RT3 was still there, humming away, ready to shape yet another generation's idea of studio sound. Other studios built their reputations the same way, by hunting down classic pianos, organs, synths, and amps that gave musicians access to sounds they could never afford to own themselves. A good studio was more than four walls and a console. It was a curated arsenal of sonic, coloration, and tones. Most kept a deep bench of microphones, amplifiers, and instruments, each with their own character for engineers to experiment with. In many cases, the final decision on where to record an album came down to something as simple as, and crucial, as which studio had the best piano, organ, or mic locker. The next step was physical separation, baffles between instruments, or even putting players in entirely different rooms. This cut down on bleed and gave engineers precise control over each instrument and vocal track. The result was a level of clarity and isolation that made studio sound something entirely different from what anyone would ever hear in a typical living room. From those origins, it's fair to say studio sound was meant to be clean, well separated, and revealing, where every detail could be heard without the room getting in the way. By that logic, any headphone, speaker, or playback chain marketed for studio use should deliver precise detail, strong instrument and stereo separation, and an immediate, accurate response to mix changes, so engineers can catch every nuance before it hits the final master. You could also argue that a truly studio headphone or speaker should add no coloration of its own, so the mix stays accurate no matter where it's played back. A bass-heavy headphone, for example, might trick an audio engineer into cutting around 120 Hz to tame a kick drum that only sounds bloated because of the gear. Then when that same mix hits a neutral playback system, the low end suddenly feels hollow and lifeless. If you're using colored monitors or headphones, you'd better know their quirks inside and out. When to trust what you're hearing and when to ignore that extra lift or dip that's just your playback chain lying to you. Today there are almost as many studios as there are artists, and each one sounds a little different. Some are little more than converted closets, while others are sprawling multi-million-dollar temples of acoustics. No two sound exactly alike, just as no two artists share the same vision. So what is studio sound in 2025? Beyond some basic expectations of clarity and detail, it's basically a free-for-all. An idea as fluid and subjective as the music being made. And that, my friends, is acoustically speaking. So what do you think, folks? With studios no longer being the coveted temples of yore, with the likes of Billie Eilish and Phineas producing their own records in the comfort of their own homes, what does studio sound mean to you at this point? Let us know in the comments below. As always, to keep up on all things studio sound, hi-fi, home theater, home audio, gadgets, wearables, and tech, be sure to bookmark ecoustics.com. Until next time.